Hi, how are you? Oh, excuse, sorry. I think I did something here to your mic.
TV6.
You want to just double check? I think I did something. It just kind of went.
Good?
Next thing you know, you charge me for your mic here. Like, hold on. This time I didn't touch it.
What kind of old thing are they having? What kind of old thing are they coming out of TV6?
All the money that TV6 have.
Next thing you know, they're taping it and it just fall.
All the riches that TV6 have.
How old Michael are coming out?
It's on the floor.
Okay. Yes, we good? Yes? Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our media conference. I have with me this morning Senator the Honorable Amory Brown and also the Honorable Marvin Gonzalez to discuss a few matters. I will start first this morning. I want to address the issue that continues to engage members of the public, and it really has to do with the courtesy call of the Honorable Ambassador, the Ambassador of Venezuela. And I would like to take the time to share some very important information with you. Now, whilst I spoke about this, I think sometime last week, I have seen where it's engaging the attention of members of the public and the media, and I thought it necessary to use this opportunity to clarify some important matters. I want to share with you that since I assumed the office of Leader of the Opposition, I have had several courtesy calls. So this is not an isolated event, but I want to take the time to share with you at least the procedure for members of the public who may not be aware. Because I have seen in the newspaper, I have seen it on Facebook, TikTok, basically people trying to figure out how did this meeting actually happen. So I want to first of all share with you that a letter was sent to my office from the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs on the 28th of October, request for courtesy call on the Honorable Penelope Beckles, Leader of the Opposition. And just to ensure that this information is accurate, the letter says that the Embassy of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela has requested the assistance of the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs in facilitating an appointment for His Excellency Alvaro Sanchez Cordero to pay a courtesy call. So this letter was sent here to my office, and we subsequently met on the 30th of October. Now I'd like to share with you that since assuming the office of the Leader of the Opposition, I have had requests from Ireland, and to indicate that it goes through the same procedure. You get a letter from the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, also from the Republic of India, High Commissioner, I saw him as well. Also from the State of Palestine, from Cuba, and the other request that I have is from Japan, and we're organizing that meeting as soon as possible. So that when I received that letter from the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, that is how the courtesy call took place. So I hope that clears up, the misconception, the feeling that you are somewhere going against the government and you're not being patriotic, and so many other comments that you're hearing from some people in the public domain as it relates to that letter, no, not to the letter, as it relates to the visit. What I did not say, maybe I should be clear, is that when the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs write you, they also indicate what the person is coming to talk about. So that the letter says to express appreciation for her party's stance in support of Latin America and the Caribbean as a zone of peace, as declared by CELAC in Havana in 2014, and to offer His Excellency's readiness in the capacity as Dean of the Diplomatic Corps to liaise with embassies and heads of missions, noting that all engagements will be coordinated through the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, as well as to convey congratulations from the government of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela on her selection as leader of the People's National Movement. Now, I took note of the fact that after my visit, the Express newspapers spoke with the Honorable Prime Minister as it relates to that visit. And the Honorable Prime Minister said, I think they are making a huge mistake by taking the sides of our narco government and of drug and arms traffickers. They should be standing in defense of our law-abiding citizens. Now, I said to you, this was a courtesy call, and you notice that it specifies what is the purpose of the call. It was not a long visit, about 15 minutes. And, I'm really I'm not shocked, but it is absolutely ridiculous for the Prime Minister, following a letter coming from her minister to me, that the Honorable Prime Minister will then put this in the public domain, to make that kind of what I call reckless statement, and a statement that is calculated to cause mischief by virtue of an ambassador paying a courtesy call. Now, I'm quite aware that on the day of that courtesy call, the Honorable Prime Minister was declared persona non grata by the National Assembly of Venezuela. That had nothing to do with me. My request was made before then. And therefore, it is quite unfortunate that the Prime Minister will want to, for you to see this kind of headline, penny back in narco government. But let me also say, therefore, that this procedure is a normal procedure. We have maintained what our position is, that is that our region remain a zone of peace. But you would also realize that the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs was asked about this courtesy call, and he said he was unbothered. You would also notice that this government, notwithstanding whatever is taking place, has indicated that they will be appointing an ambassador to Venezuela. So with all that is going on, you're going to appoint an ambassador to Venezuela. You're also making it clear on each and every occasion that you have a very good relationship with the people of Venezuela. But then you come to say penny back in narco government and slams CARICOM stance on Venezuela. All of it is calculated to create mischief, to cause a distraction, especially because all of these discussions were taking place around the budget. That budget that is fake and fraudulent. And now that the people of Trinidad and Tobago, over the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks, through the Finance Committee, has realized all these several taxes that this government has put in place. So those who originally said it was a good budget, when the Finance Committee takes place, and you see that there are no allocations for so many different things, the people of Trinidad and Tobago are very much awake. Related to this matter, of course, is also the fact that the Honorable Prime Minister again, and whilst we put out a press release, I'm using this opportunity because I did not do a press conference on this matter, PNM protecting drug mafia. This is a headline from the Newsday. And The Honorable Prime Minister indicated that it is most concerning that the PNM, a party long suspected of being financed by local drug mafia, is overtly attempting to undermine efforts to stop drug, arms, and human trafficking into our country. Let me make it abundantly clear that if the Prime Minister has evidence that the People's National Movement is in any way involved in any sign of drug mafia, then the Prime Minister knows to take it to the police. This is a very serious allegation, and the Prime Minister should withdraw that allegation and apologize. Because the time has come for this use of inflammatory language consistently whenever you're under pressure. When you are clueless about governance, you want to put the blame on the People's National Movement. And that needs to stop. It is no different to kill them violently and dealing with a very sensitive situation as it relates to Venezuela in a most undiplomatic manner that has caused the people of Venezuela, caused the people in the region. I mean, Trinidad and Tobago is now being discussed everywhere. I'm sure all of you have family. You're looking at Miami Herald, you're looking at CNN, BBC is here, Al Jazeera is here, and everybody wants to know what really is going on. So my colleague, the Honorable Marvin Gonzalez, will discuss a little more as to how we got to that stage of panic buying, our literal gridlock last Friday in Port of Spain, where people in Trinidad and Tobago were trying to figure out what is going on. And people were trying to get to their homes, schools were sending children home, and the Honorable Prime Minister says, be calm. She's not aware of anything. She's not aware of what's happening down in the army, that there was an official order put in place as it relates to people returning, those who, whether you were on leave, you're on vacation, and similar, a notice going out from the police. But that didn't stop there. This has continued, and what is very interesting is that if the United States has made it very clear that, I mean, they are dealing with people who into drug trafficking, narco traffickers, and you in the public domain all over the world, they are seeing these types of headlines as it relates to the opposition. What really is the intention of the government? Absolutely no good intention. And if it is, they would ensure that people are paid on time, people get their salaries on time. All of it is a distraction for their incompetence. Because I'm sure many of you are aware of people who have gone, reached into the bank in the line, or you have taken your card and you go to the ATM machine. Because when you look, I mean, with technology, you can go online and you see that you supposedly think you have been paid until you get to the bank and they say, yes, whilst it may be showing that you have been paid, you can't access any cash. That is the level of incompetence of this government. And therefore creating all this sort of distraction and want to put all the blame on the People's National Movement. I just want to tell them we will have none of it. The last matter I want to deal with before I hand over to my colleague is on the Guardian today. Antigua Prime Minister warns Trinidad and Tobago may be in breach of the Treaty of Chaguaramas with duty hike. And if I just could be allowed 2 minutes or less, the Honorable Prime Minister of Antigua makes reference to the fact that in speaking about these taxes, he has indicated that TNT would not want to see its status as the supermarket of the region eroded, especially if tariff increases hurt it more than other territories in the region. the Prime Minister of Antigua says that I just hope, well, while higher duties to protect health are understandable, based on certain statements from my dear friend Kamala, I'm reading, I just hope she understands that if we are part of the same community, there's a need to strengthen integration, not fracture it, especially given the current geopolitical landscape and certain situations in the Southern Caribbean that can destabilize the region. I am of the firm view that this is a very important matter, similar to the Venezuela situation, because this is the CARICOM region. This is not Trinidad and Tobago alone. And we understand that when you look at the balance of trade, we know it's Guyana, it is over 4 billion. We know it's Jamaica, over 3 billion. We know Barbados, we know Grenada, and we understand the significance of trading with our CARICOM partners. It is very easy for the Honorable Prime Minister to say that you're going to look for markets elsewhere. But when we think about the vessel USS Ford coming into the region, and so many people have this feeling that something is likely to take place in our region, do you really think that people are going to come and invest here at this time? And do you think it is in our interest as a country to put ourselves in a position where a Prime Minister of another country within CARICOM is warning you and telling you that the importance is to strengthen integration and not fracture it? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Leader of the Opposition. I also acknowledge the presence of the Opposition Chief Whip, Member of Parliament, the Honorable Marvin Gonzalez. I want to endorse the sentiments expressed by the Honorable Penelope Beckles-Robinson this morning and join in condemning the Prime Minister of this country, Kamala Persad-Bissessar, for misleading the people of Trinidad and Tobago and gaslighting the people of this nation and those right across the Caribbean region with respect to her positions on Venezuela and regional security. I want to draw to the attention of the public an official statement by the United Nations, published on their website on October 31st, 2025. Under the hand of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, experienced diplomat, Mr. Volker Turk. The caption of this United Nations statement is this: U.S. strikes in Caribbean and Pacific breach international law, says UN Human Rights Chief. And just one statement, the caption statement: airstrikes carried out by the United States against alleged drug trafficking boats in the Caribbean and Pacific drew sharp criticism from the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, who said, and this is the important phrase, they violate international human rights law and must stop immediately. Ladies and gentlemen, this represents the first time in our records that a Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago would have proudly and publicly associated this nation with violations of international human rights, of the UN Charter, and international law. With respect to the foreign policy of Trinidad and Tobago, she has farmed out our foreign policy to foreign shores and put this nation in a position that is unsustainable and untenable. Everyone in this country knows that we exist just 7 miles from the shores of Venezuela. That is permanent. That is not going to change in 3 years or 5 years or even 100 years. Everyone also knows that we exist within a CARICOM context. We live in the Caribbean Sea with our neighbors. That's not going to change in 3 years or 5 years or in the long term. So the Prime Minister of this nation is human and finite. At some point, she will no longer be the Prime Minister. That's a fact. The current President of the United States of America also has a limit in terms of his term. At some point, he will no longer be the President of the United States of America. The President of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, also is a human with a limit. So one day in the future, he will no longer be the President of Venezuela. What will not change is our obligation and requirement and responsibility to manage our neighborly and regional relations with prudence and wisdom and sustainability. And in this regard, the Prime Minister and her government have failed the people of this land. And by extension, she has failed the people of CARICOM. I listened closely to the leader of the opposition in having to defend an official meeting here at the leader of the opposition's office with the ambassador of Venezuela, all caused by the inflammatory rhetoric of Kamla Persad-Bissessar, when in fact, as has been presented, it was official correspondence from the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs that established that particular meeting in the course of the routine business of engagements between the diplomatic corps and stakeholders in Trinidad and Tobago. The hypocrisy of those statements from the Prime Minister needs to be underscored further, because just a few days ago, her Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs was celebrating that same ambassador as what? Alvaro, his friend. Alvaro, his good friend. You go onto the website and the media releases of the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, this same ambassador is celebrated because they were running this dual narrative of one, we want regime change, but at the same time, we are good friends with the Venezuelan people. So you had Minister Sobas and Ambassador Cordero shaking hands, being photographed. The first photo on many of the pages of the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs at various diplomatic engagements is somehow between the minister and the ambassador of Venezuela. All of a sudden, when she is deemed to be persona non grata, as the song goes, such interactions become unpatriotic. I want to condemn that hypocrisy. And then if these are narco-terrorists, and this is a representative of a narco-terrorist, why is the government sending official correspondence on their behalf? And how does the Prime Minister reconcile that view and her rhetoric with the fact that the ambassador of Venezuela in Port-of-Spain currently serves as the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps in Trinidad and Tobago, with specific obligations and responsibilities in Port-of-Spain as the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps? How does she reconcile all of these things? And to accuse the opposition and all of those who have taken the course of peace, to accuse them of having a narcotics agenda is shocking and reprehensible coming from a head of government, particularly one who may not be unfamiliar with the finding of a green plant-like substance in South Trinidad, who might be familiar with a video that everyone in this country has seen of a sitting government minister preparing and smoking drugs with what seemed to be Venezuelan individuals several years ago, back in the government of Trinidad and Tobago. But we have to sit here and see media reports where the Prime Minister is somehow trying to associate those who are calling for peace with a narcotics agenda. That is what we refer to as gaslighting and deliberate misleading of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I want to draw a reference for the benefit of the Prime Minister and the few social media trolls who seem to swallow everything she offers. On the 25th of October, there was a very important piece of correspondence generated by the Antilles Episcopal Conference under the signature of Port of Spain, Jamaica, St. Kitts and Nevis, having regional responsibility, the voice of this important faith-based group. I just want to read a few lines from this letter which went across across the region. The bishops of the Antilles Episcopal Conference view with grave concern the recent buildup of naval and other military assets in the Southern Caribbean. This is not the People's National Movement. And the potential implications this poses for the socioeconomic, political, and humanitarian well-being of our region and its people. In a few weeks, the world will commemorate the 59th World Day of Peace. I go on. The letter says, we must speak clearly to the moral challenges facing our region. You're hearing the voice of truth. The narcotics trade continues to devastate Caribbean societies, eroding lives, futures, and the moral fabric of communities. This is a grave crisis for the church and families everywhere, one we are duty-bound to confront. Yet, the arbitrary and unwarranted taking of life cannot be justified as a means of resolution. Such acts violate the sacredness of human life. Likewise, the disregard for the sovereignty of independent nations cannot be accepted as a reasonable measure in the name of border security. War or the threat of war is never the right solution. It goes on and on and on, and ends with this statement. Together, we place our hope, trust, and prayers in the pursuit of what? A peaceful and just resolution that upholds human dignity, national sovereignty, and the common good of all. I want to commend this piece of correspondence. This letter contains more wisdom and truth than everything the government of Trinidad and Tobago and our Prime Minister has said on this U.S.-Venezuela issue. Truth transcends individual religions, and this appeal going out from the Antilles Episcopal Conference represents the voice of truth. In stark contrast to our Prime Minister, who is seeking to paint with the broadest political brush everyone who questions her actions and her irresponsible rhetoric, everyone who calls for the peaceful conduct of our regional relations in keeping with international law, everyone who refers her to the UN Charter. She's trying to paint them as narco traffickers and supporters of narco-terrorism. And then to bring the point home further, on the 1st of November, the Archbishop of Port of Spain took this plea for peace and voice of truth even further in a pastoral letter entitled Calming the Troubled Waters. I will give you one line from that particular piece of correspondence from the Archbishop of Port of Spain. and that's this. The church must act according to conscience, guided not by political expediency, but by the gospel of peace. We must resist any logic that normalizes conflict or weaponizes fear. The Christian response is not to mirror aggression, but to cultivate reconciliation wherever we are. And I make the point, truth transcends individual religions, and truth resonates in the hearts of people, notwithstanding whatever label they may ascribe to their choice of faith. So is the Prime Minister accusing the clear voices of our faith-based community in this region and in this country, who are condemning the hypocrisy and the warmongering and the regime change agenda, as supportive of narco-terrorism? I invite her to further clarify. The other point I wish to make, which many in our society have already come to the conclusion, that this government does not have its own independent foreign policy, but is operating as mimics of another agenda coming from outside of the shores of Trinidad and Tobago. And once again, this is unprecedented. This has never happened. These circumstances have never befallen the people of Trinidad and Tobago before. So public support and cheerleading for extrajudicial killings and the violation of international law, no prime minister in this country has ever done that, except Kamla Persad-Bissessar. And that stain will remain with her throughout her remaining term in office. It will remain with her. Threats of the use of force. One government minister was heard to be threatening nuclear war against a neighboring state. Unprecedented, mimicking another type of narrative where might is right. Raids are similar in nature. I've heard the persons asking the question. On some of these raids and the immigration approach now, somehow reflective of the ICE raids that have traumatized some of our Caribbean people and nationals of Trinidad and Tobago residing abroad and overseas. It seems to be a mimic approach as opposed to something sovereign and authentic and representing the voice of Trinidad and Tobago. I wouldn't draw reference to their COVID rhetoric, which was also mimicking. But just to make the point that when you paint with a broad brush and you ascribe a drug label to all who are calling for peace, that reflects in some way the response to persons who have been calling, like us, who have been calling for peace and an end to the genocide in Gaza, where the reaction in some quarters has been to paint with a broad brush and label that anti-Semitism. As well, we saw recently a very interesting congratulations going out to the new government of Bolivia, not on the letterhead of the Office of the Prime Minister, not on the letterhead of the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, but co-signed on the letterhead of the Secretary of State of the United States of America. Unprecedented times and evidence of the farming out of the foreign policy of Trinidad and Tobago. Mimics, inauthentic and non-representative of the people of this country. And just to remind the media, this is not the first time that Kamla Persad-Bissessar has been accused and found guilty of plagiarism. Exactly 5 years ago, and it's related to foreign affairs, exactly 5 years ago to the month, in November 2020, a certain British politician by the name of Mr. Keir Starmer, who is now the head of government of the UK, posted on Facebook congratulations to then President Joe Biden of the United States. It was a famous posting. Congratulations to Joe Biden on his election as president. He ran a campaign on decency, integrity, compassion, and strength. I also want to congratulate Kamala Harris on being elected vice president, the first woman of color to take that role. The victory is one of hope and unity over dishonesty and division, on and on. A few hours later, our Prime Minister, the mimic, Kamala Persad-Bissessar, went on Facebook and posted as leader of the opposition. Congratulations to Joe Biden on his election as President of the United States. He ran a campaign on decency, integrity, and compassion. I also want to congratulate Kamala Harris on being elected Vice President, the first woman and person of color to take that role. The victory is won for hope and unity over dishonesty and division, etc. Word for word. This is her modus operandi. Inauthentic, unrepresentative of the standards and voice of Trinidad and Tobago, and a mere mimic of talking points and a narrative generated elsewhere. My final note is that the opposition takes note of an offer by Caribbean leaders to mediate and offer a pathway to peace in circumstances in which Trinidad and Tobago seems to have put all their chips on a path of warfare. Comments made by the Prime Minister of Dominica, the distinguished Prime Minister of Barbados, and others who've joined former Prime Ministers in transmitting the voice of truth. That war is not a solution, especially for a small state like Trinidad and Tobago, and drawing a stark contrast between a massive military armada, the largest in the recent history of the Caribbean region, to these claims of narco attacks against small vessels traveling within the Caribbean Sea. And finally, Madam Leader of the Opposition, I want to give a clear warning to the Prime Minister of this country. I want to refer again to this case, and it will arise in the future. This is a case before the International Criminal Court. You see, sometimes heads of government feel they can say and do anything for their support base to clap and cheer, and there will be no consequences in the future. Here's a former leader who's currently facing the most dire consequence. This is the case at the International Criminal Court against Rodrigo Duterte, the former head of government, president of the Philippines. I'm referring to the official publication of the International Criminal Court, the prosecutor versus Rodrigo Roa Duterte. I'm reading from the case documents. The former president of the Philippines has been accused. He is allegedly responsible for the crimes against humanity of murder and attempted murder, allegedly committed on the territory of the Republic of the Philippines between the 1st of November 2011 and 16th of March 2019 in the context of the War on Drugs campaign. The prosecution and the ICC pre-trial chamber assessed the material submitted and found reasonable grounds to believe that Mr. Duterte is individually responsible as an indirect co-perpetrator. I want to repeat that phrase. He has been found, there has been reasonable grounds to believe that he is individually responsible as an indirect co-perpetrator. He didn't kill those persons extrajudicially himself, but he's accused of being an indirect co-perpetrator for the crime against humanity of murder. And an arrest warrant was issued after he demitted office. And just to say that the United States of America is not one of the state parties to the International Criminal Court. But guess what? Trinidad and Tobago is one of the founders of the ICC, led by the great late A.N.R. Robinson. We remain a state party, and our leaders must be held to a higher standard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Good morning, members of the media, and let me recognize as well the leader of the opposition, the political leader, the PNM, Ms. Penny Beckles Robinson, the vice chairman of the People's National Movement, Senator Dr. Amy Brown. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to discuss two issues that are currently engaging the attention of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. The first issue is one that we are all familiar with. And you would recall last week, Friday, the pandemonium, the fear that struck the people of Trinidad and Tobago, that resulted in gridlock traffic all over, gridlock traffic in the city of Port of Spain, where persons were stuck in traffic for hours trying to get their children out of schools. Groceries were packed with people who were engaged in panic buying. Employers were forced to send their employees at home because in the international news media, there were reports of an imminent military strike by the US against Venezuela. And whilst all of that was happening, we got information that all members of the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force were instructed to return to base immediately. At the same time, leave was suspended by one of the deputy commissioners of police, I think the acting commissioner of police, Mr. Junior Benjamin, and police officers were also placed on high alert. We in the opposition, in the discharge of our constitutional responsibilities and functions under the Constitution and the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, on our way to Parliament, we decided on behalf of the people to invoke the appropriate standing orders to get the ministers responsible to account to the people of Trinidad and Tobago as to the state of affairs at that point in time. As Opposition Chief Whip, I filed a question to the Minister of Defense. The minister, or rather the question was approved, and when it was placed to the minister on the floor of the Parliament, not surprisingly, the minister invoked Standing Order 27-1G, which is a standing order that prevents a minister from answering a parliamentary question. And whilst all of that was happening, Port of Spain was on standstill with gridlock traffic, persons rushing to their homes, children being sent home, groceries being packed because of the fear that gripped the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And the Minister of of Defense, who is responsible for the military, choosing not to answer pertinent questions on the matter on the floor of Parliament. You would recall that the Prime Minister, arriving in Parliament that same afternoon, was approached by the media and was asked to whether or not she was aware that the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force was placed on high alert and soldiers were instructed to return to base. And I want to quote what the Prime Minister said, according to the Saturday Express of November the 1st, 2025. Upon arriving at Parliament, Prasad Bisesa was questioned by the media about reports that Defence Force officers were being called to duty. And this is what the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "I don't know." That was her response to the media, and by extension, the people of Trinidad and Tobago. "I don't know. I have no information or knowledge about that." The Prime Minister, as head of our National Security Council, telling the people of Trinidad and Tobago, when you posed the question to her as she arrived in the Parliament, that she was not aware that the Defence Force were being called to duty and asked to return to base with immediate effect. "I have no knowledge. I have no information. I'll find out," she said. And when pressed, she said, "I don't know. No one has requested these things of me. So when it comes on my desk or on this phone, I have seen nothing of that sort. And I get a lot of messages. So if there is a situation that arises, we will deal with it." This is the Prime Minister telling you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, telling you, members of the media, that she was not aware that soldiers were being instructed to return to base, and by extension, members of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service being placed on high alert. I was surprised, and perhaps not surprised, that in yesterday's Newsday, a report by Clint Chantak, where the Minister of Defense is saying the PM to be briefed on Defence Force orders. The PM to be briefed on Defence Force orders. Defence Minister Wayne Sturt says that Prime Minister Prasad Bisesa will be briefed about decisions to recall the Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force personnel to base and a subsequent order for them to stand down. Ladies and gentlemen, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, this is a very serious matter, because as of yesterday, the Minister of Defense, the Honorable Wayne Sturt, is reported to now telling the people of Trinidad and Tobago that the Prime Minister, as chair of the National Security Council and as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, was not aware that our Defence Force and members of the Defence Force were instructed to return to base immediately, and members of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service were placed on high alert. At a time when the country was in absolute panic, when there was fear driving through the hearts of every man and every woman and every child, where there were reports in the international media of an imminent military strike on our neighbor Venezuela, and the people of Trinidad and Tobago asking pertinent questions from their leaders, the Prime Minister as chair of the National Security Council, and the Minister of Defense invoking standing orders of the Parliament, not to account to you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, it tells of a very serious state of affairs in this country. And we have to ask the question whether or not the Minister of Defense, who, based on what he is saying, was in fact aware that members of the Defence Force were instructed to return to base, and refused to speak to the people of Trinidad and Tobago when a question was filed in the Parliament. And now that the Minister is admitting that the Prime Minister was not briefed on this very important matter, then the Prime Minister is not in control of her government. The Prime Minister is not in control of the security issues affecting the people of Trinidad and Tobago, or the Minister of Defense not updating the National Security Council and his Prime Minister on these very important matters, either the Minister of Defense must be called upon to resign from office immediately, or the Prime Minister, if she cannot discharge her constitutional duties to protect the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and perhaps may not have been truthful when she said, if we were to take out her words, that she was not aware that members of the Defense Force were called out to duty and asked to return to base with immediate effect, then the Prime Minister would have failed in her responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. These are very serious issues. And the government, the Prime Minister, and the Minister of Defense, all of them must not be allowed to get past this particular issue with a tap on their wrist. When the entire country was in fear, when everyone was begging for information and for their leaders to speak to them. But what I found was also more interesting is that in the Saturday's Express newspapers, there is a picture. You can look at it. It's on page 4 of the Saturday's Express, with the Prime Minister together with the Chief of Defense Staff, as well as the commanding officer of the regiment. The Prime Minister met them at the Red House at the same time when the public was in fear, when there was gridlock traffic all over, when there was pandemonium taking place all over. And she met with the head of the Defense Force and the commanding officer of the regiment. And this is the caption under the photograph. Prime Minister Kamla Persad Bissessar, third from right, and Minister of Defense Wayne Sturge Center congratulate Captain Don Polo Wright, who was promoted to Commodore and Chief of Defense Staff, while Lieutenant Commander Dwayne Edwards Left was elevated to Colonel and Commanding Officer of the Trinidad and Tobago Regiment. I find that to be very interesting. How can the Prime Minister, meeting with the head, or rather the Chief of Defense Staff, and the Commanding Officer of the regiment in the Red House, at the Red House, to promote them or to hand their badge of rank at the time when the country was in deep fear and pandemonium, and the Prime Minister refuse and or fail to ask the head of our national security services to account to her the state of affairs in Trinidad and Tobago. And it was in the debate of the state of emergency I read out the release by the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force as well as the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service that our military and our servicemen were being called out and placed on high alert. And the Prime Minister and the Defense Minister refusing to speak to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And as of yesterday, the Defense Minister telling you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, that he is preparing a brief on this matter to the Prime Minister. Well, before he prepared that brief to the Prime Minister, she had the opportunity to hear from the Chief of Defense Staff and from the Commanding Officer of the regiment, who were at her office last week Friday. She had the opportunity to ask her to update her in her capacity as chair of the National Security Council on the issues that were affecting the people of Trinidad and Tobago. The Prime Minister needs to come clean, and she must tell the people of Trinidad and Tobago whether she is in a state to discharge her duties as chair of the National Security Council. And if she cannot, she must remove herself from office in the best interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and so the Minister of Defense must do likewise. Another issue I want to raise with you, members of the media, is the operation of the U.S. Southcom. Now, as a minister, a former minister of national security, I can tell you that on a daily basis, you get reports on issues of national security in Trinidad and Tobago. And you have to read those reports carefully, and based on what are contained in those reports, you have to update your Prime Minister, update the National Security Council, so that appropriate action can be taken to protect the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Now, Trinidad and Tobago has been part of the U.S. Southcom for years. And you may ask yourself, what is the U.S. Southcom all about? And I will just allow me to read so that you have an understanding of the operations of the U.S. Southcom in the Caribbean, Latin America, and South America. The U.S. Southern Command is responsible, or Southcom, is responsible for security cooperation and contingency operations in Central America, South America, and the Caribbean, excluding U.S. Commonwealth territories and possessions. It works include building relations with partner nations, countering threats from criminal organizations and other actors, and providing security cooperation and humanitarian assistance. It also engages in countering threats. It counters threats from transnational criminal organizations, violent extremist organizations, and other malign state actors through its efforts. These are some of the work that is done by the U.S. Southern Command operations, operating in Central and South America and the Caribbean. On a weekly basis, as Minister of National Security, reports will arrive on your desk on the operations of the U.S. Southern Command. And those reports will give an account of all of the operations that would have taken place in the Caribbean, in Central and South America, which comprises large drug interdictions, arrest of narco traffickers and persons engaged in human trafficking on the coast of Colombia, Venezuela, and other states. These are reports that arrive on your desk on a weekly basis so that you understand the work of that cooperation between local law enforcement agencies with their counterparts in the region, including the United States of America and the U.S. government. When these reports arrive on your desk as Minister of National Security, the appropriate measures are taken to update the chair of the National Security Council, which is the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. So I want to ask the Prime Minister and the Minister of Defense whether they continue to receive reports from the U.S. Southcom on operations at sea, on drug interdictions, persons arrested, and persons prosecuted who might be involved in human trafficking and the illegal drug trade. Because in today's papers, in today's Express, we see a report where the Prime Minister is claiming that there has been a reduction in the flow of drugs in Trinidad and Tobago. And she is ascribing that to the operations where boats have been blown up by the U.S. authorities who have been allegedly involved in drug trafficking in the Caribbean. And I want to remind the people of Trinidad and Tobago that these operations, these sanctioned operations under the U.S. Southcom, it's been something that has been in place for years, and they have been operating within the confines of the law, with drugs, large amounts of drugs being confiscated, persons prosecuted, and these things are ongoing exercises that have been taking place in our region for years with the cooperation of all of our partners in Central America, in South America, as well as the entire Caribbean. And the Prime Minister must tell the people of Trinidad and Tobago what is the status of the U.S. Southcom operation in this region with respect to drug interdiction and the arrest of persons that are involved in human trafficking. Finally, you would recall that last Friday we were in Parliament where we debated the extension of the state of emergency. There is no need for us to rehash our position with respect to our opposition to the extension of the state of emergency because the government has failed in its responsibility once again to speak clearly to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And we took issue with the Attorney General because he has failed to come out clearly to let us know that the threats that exist when the state of emergency was called in Trinidad and Tobago, whether those threats continue to exist, where certain persons in the judiciary and in law enforcement, their lives were at risk. And the president, having been satisfied based on information provided to the cabinet and the minister and the National Security Council, that there was a need for the declaration of a state of emergency. Up to this point in time, the government has not informed us, or there has been no successful arrest or prosecution of persons who were allegedly involved in threatening the lives of certain state officials in the judiciary and law enforcement. And we objected based on this, and the Attorney General, of course, came to the lower house, tried to chide the opposition for calling upon him to speak to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and the government using its majority to pass the extension of the state of emergency. But one of the issues that we raised during the debate is the non-functioning of the SOE tribunal. Today, it is now being reported that detainees at the Eastern Correctional Rehabilitation Center in Santa Rosa, they are now engaged in a hunger strike because most of the persons who were arrested via detention orders and are being confined at the Eastern Correctional Facilities in Santa Rosa, they have not been charged. And in many instances, the police have not interviewed them with respect to any criminal activities that they may or may not be involved in. And it is a point that we raised during our contribution in the debate last week, Friday, because information reached the opposition that the tribunal has not been functioning in the way that it was intended to function, because reports are being submitted to the Minister of Homeland Security, and he is not acting upon those reports. And because the minister is not acting upon those reports that were submitted to him by the SOE tribunal, you have large swath of people remaining detained at the Eastern Correctional Facilities, not being interviewed, not being charged, and not being afforded the protection of the law under the SOE regulations. And today, when this report came out that detainees are now staging a hunger strike, it confirms the fears of the opposition during the debate in Parliament last week, Friday, ladies and gentlemen. And we are warning the people of Trinidad and Tobago, that it is clear that the government has no crime plan, that they intend to operate within a state of emergency to contain criminal activities, because of their inability to provide a clear, cogent, and comprehensive crime plan to the people of Trinidad and Tobago as to the things that is going to engage in to combat and reduce crime and criminality in Trinidad and Tobago. The SOE tribunal, based on information reaching to us, has not been functioning because the Minister of Homeland Security is not doing his part where those reports are concerned. And those reports are not going out, and therefore you have no information with respect to persons, whether or not the state should continue to detain them because of the absence of information and the absence of evidence. And this is what I want to quote from the report in today's Guardian. The hunger strike began on October 28th as a peaceful protest. The detainees are simply saying to the minister to instruct the police to do their work and investigate the allegations in a timely manner, and either prefer a charge or recommend that the detainee is released, pending any further developments. They said, Detainees should not simply be arrested with no evidence, placed in a cell, no investigation, and left at the mercy of when the SOE will come to an end. And not surprisingly, you, members of the media, reaching out to the Minister of Defense and the Minister of National Security, and they have no response. We are living in dangerous times. The government is not prepared to operate within the confines of the Constitution and the law. And by so doing, they have placed the lives of hundreds of persons in grave jeopardy. And you must remember that this is the same government in 2014 or 2012 when they declared a state of emergency and released hundreds of prisoners. Those persons filed action in court and they were able to claim hundreds of millions of dollars in damages. And I fear that you, the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago, will be called upon once again to pay millions of dollars in damages for persons who have been illegally detained during this state of emergency. I thank you very much.
Okay, so we take a couple of questions. If you want to, as Marvin is on his legs, do you want to ask Marvin any questions? Anyone? Okay. Any questions for Amy or myself?
I wanted to know, I know you spoke about getting correspondence from the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs on the visit of the Venezuelan ambassador. The precise day, who came up with that day?
What do you mean, who came up with that day?
Well, you said that the time, what I want to find out is you have gotten the letter, and who at the end of it decides whether it will be next week Wednesday or next week Friday? How does that, how is the day chosen?
So I think we've established some of the important points that the Embassy of Venezuela would have communicated with the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, the Ministry of Official Correspondence. The Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs would have officially corresponded with the Office of the Leader of the Opposition, alerting them of the meeting, indicating the reasons and the agenda, etc. In terms of the date, obviously the host of the meeting would have to engage in some interaction to firm up the timing, because it would have to be hosted at the office of the Leader of the Opposition, and that would have to be, there would have to be concurrence on the Venezuelan side. So, but that's a normal procedure. There's nothing unusual that would have taken place here.
When you settled on the day, you would have known on that day that the parliament in Venezuela would...
Who would have known that?
No, but I said by the time they met, both sides.
Ria, I'm not sure what you're asking. I don't know,
No,
Leader,
no,
but because there is no conspiracy or agenda in scheduling to embarrass the government. This is a routine interaction between a constitutional office, and a member of the diplomatic corps who happens to be the dean of the diplomatic corps, and this is the normal course
Let
of
me just
exchange.
make it abundantly clear. I would not and could not have had information on that. I mean, that would have happened. We met at 9 o'clock because we had Parliament at 10. So that was the first meeting for the day. At some time during the day, that would have transpired.
Yeah, but when you met,
I mean,
the
I cannot,
morning,
listen, I
you
am
knew
not
what
in
the parliament was debating. That's what I'm just
Oh, you
saying.
mean
Venezuela?
Oh, you mean in Venezuela?
Yes, yes.
No,
I didn't.
I mean, that clearly, I did not have that information. And maybe if I did have the information, maybe I might have taken a different position in terms of the meeting on that day. But that information was not information that I had.
Oh, you didn't know that, okay.
But, I mean, were you aware of it?
Well, I mean, I saw several references to certainly the ambassador would have known, I guess.
Well,
He must have known.
Yeah, but that never came up. That
And-
was
and-
not,
And therefore,
I mean, that never came up. And I mean, clearly, when the ministry sends the information to us, they
Yeah.
specify
Right,
specifically.
right.
So those are, I mean, we had parliament that day. So I
Yeah.
mean, and that's why I agreed to do it at 9, because parliament was at 10. So
Right.
and I know for sure the rest of the DODs would not have been possible.
Right.
That information was not at all communicated to me. I was not aware of it. I mean, during the day, you heard, because now with technology, TikTok, Facebook, yes,
Right.
but no.
right. No, I mean, the suggestion is not that you were,
Yeah.
but that the ambassador,
Oh, you mean he would have known?
yes,
Well,
would have,
Well, it's quite
been
possible,
doing
but
some-
yes.
sending some messages. Now, that's what I mean.
Well, I mean, I cannot say what he knew, but what I know is that that never came up.
Mm.
I mean, if it did, and he knew, well, I mean, but we look at what happened after that. I mean, they were willing to say that you're going to you're going to still appoint an ambassador. They met, there was a function, and he's maintaining that he has good relationships, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, with the Venezuelan ambassador, and he calls him his friend,
Right.
So I think it's unfortunate I'm glad you cleared it up, in the sense that he may have known, and if he did, I am not aware, and he never raised it.
You mentioned as well that you have received requests from ambassadors or representatives of other countries to
Yes.
meet, but you met with him. Could you see how many other such persons you would have met with, and why you decided to take that meeting?
I don't understand the question.
You had requests from other ambassadors?
Yes,
of other-
I met with all of them.
With them all.
Yes, I went
Yeah.
through the list, so I said that so let me just clarify. All those persons that I mentioned, I met with every single one of them, save and except Japan, because that was also very recent. So Ireland, China, Palestine, India, yes. And from time to time, and as the ambassador also shared with us, he's the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, and he too can assist in terms of meetings, but it still goes through the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs. So they would be aware whenever you're having these meetings.
South Korea has expressed.
And South Korea has also expressed, if they do, let us say from time to time you can meet them at a function or somewhere, and you say, well, okay, if you're interested in a meeting, this is the procedure, you write to the ministry, and the ministry will contact us, and then meeting.
Dr. Brown, I saw you were referencing the legal issues with Duterte, is it?
Duterte.
Are you suggesting that such an eventuality could befall Prime Minister Khanma Prasad-Bissessar, she could find herself in a similar type of situation?
Yeah, listen, we warned this Prime Minister from the onset, over 2 months ago, right here in this room, and referred to the issue of the ICC, referred to what was then the pending charges against the former president of the Philippines. The Prime Minister has continued to double down and triple down, including very recently, on her public stance in support of these extrajudicial killings. The fact is, and I would repeat, the United States of America is not a state party to the ICC. Trinidad and Tobago is. And even if you are not the perpetrator yourself, if you can be deemed to be a co-conspirator or co-participant in activities once they are deemed to be in violation of international law and in violation of international humanitarian law, such as extrajudicial killings committed in the pursuit of any so-called war on narcotics. That's exactly what took place in the Philippines, and that is what is being purported to be taking place here in the Caribbean Sea. So it is more of a warning to the Prime Minister. These blasé and irresponsible comments, rendering of support when, by your own admission and that of your Minister responsible for External Affairs, no information, data, evidence, or details have been provided to you to offer your own support, but by extension, the support of a sovereign nation for such activities. So hopefully she is duly warned, but There's a lot of water under that bridge, unfortunately. Let's see what the future holds for it.
Any other questions?
Just one, the fact is that the government seems to be unable to get information from the US on the operations in the international waters.
Well, let me just, yeah.
And that too, that has created the panic, because when you read what
Yeah.
the minister did, it appears that they were listening to the international reports, and they decided, let's call everybody out. So, I mean.
If I could just say quickly before Amory answers. I mean, we have not, any of us here, been briefed on these matters. And a lot of what information has to be based on the media. I mean, you are seeing there was a 60 Minutes interview, you would see tweets. But at the end of the day, I think it is reasonable to say that if the Honorable Prime Minister, during her visit to the United Nations, had a meeting with Secretary Rubio, I think it is fair to assume that those lines of communication exist in some form. You would see that if President Trump is going to do something, I mean, he hasn't really been hesitating, you know. So it's kind of, for us, and that's why I have said you should really address the nation. I mean, one does not expect that if you have very sensitive information that you're going to share it with the public, but you can decide what you share. When I raised that, the Honorable Prime Minister said to the media to tell me, you know, read the Express and educate myself. Right? That is not, as the opposition, that is not the kind of response you expect from a Prime Minister. Because if this, at this time, it's really an issue of trust. And if it is people are not getting information from what they continue to consider a direct source, then they are going to be reading from everywhere. And as the Honorable Marvin Gonzalez said, if we are having Parliament, and at that time you are meeting with the head of the Defense Force, and at that time there's chaos going on, and as a Prime Minister you say, no, I don't know, I don't have, you know, and we are in the Parliament asking a question, and they invoke the relevant standing order, so they don't have to answer the question. You wanted to say something?
Well, there are so many different streams afloat here, because the other bit of information, beside what happened on Friday, has to do with the executions at
Of the-
sea.
right.
I thought maybe you might have referred
Yeah,
to that
yeah,
as
I
well.
was
Their
including that.
location, who was on board, the follow-up investigation, because even after a vessel is destroyed, one would anticipate, if you're serious about your business, there would be follow-up investigation, debris, matter, human remains, etc. You'd recall the president of Colombia asked certain questions of
Right.
Trinidad and Tobago, and the derogatory and dismissive
Yes.
posture of the prime minister of this country to those requests, and to all such concerns with respect to extrajudicial killings, a
Right.
very blasé response. But if you listen closely to Minister Sobers at the last media conference at the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, he basically gave the impression that no details have been provided.
Yeah.
The other question is, have any details been sought or requested? I don't get the impression that any has been sought, because when the family members of those Trinidad and Tobago nationals who were alleged to have been killed in those strikes have been asking questions within the territory of Trinidad and Tobago, there's been nothing to offer
Right.
from the government. So that's a clue that whoever they may be that are being killed, whether they are Venezuelans, nationals of Trinidad and Tobago, Colombians, Bolivians, and I'm glad you asked the question, but because you would have noted that one of the survivors was a citizen of the Republic of Bolivia. You would have also noted this person was, according to international reports, taken to the United States of America. You'd have also noted that they were repatriated, so-called in a definitive narco-terrorism strike, repatriated to Bolivia subsequently. And you would have further noted that individual was released And the government of Bolivia, not unfriendly to the current circumstances, the government of Bolivia indicated there was no information or evidence to indicate that that person was involved in narco trafficking. You can fill in the dots from there with respect to other potential survivors and the over 60 persons who have been executed in the course of those events. Again, the President of the United States of America doesn't answer or report to the people of this country. The Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago must, because that is the duty as the head of our government.
Okay, any further questions? Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Have a good evening. Thank you.